So first of all, African elephants, everybody knows them, but people don't generally know that they are now two species in Africa. They were thought to be subspecies up until about 3 years ago, even though when you look at their genetics, they're as African forest elephants and African savanna elephants are as different from each other as woolly mammoths and Asian elephants. And that's because they split about the same time ago, about 6 million years ago. And anybody who knows forest elephants and who also knows savanna elephants, they know, they look really different. They behave quite differently. They have very different ecology. And most forest elephants actually live in forests, and they're extremely important for those forests. Okay, so now they both have their own red lists as full species. And there was an analysis done, published earlier this year, but the results were already in the red list, and that was that forest elephants have declined over the last 2 generations by about 90%, and savanna elephants by about 70%. So from a global listing of vulnerable for the old species, which was just called the African elephant, they've now been put into forest elephants are critically endangered, and savanna elephants are endangered, according to the IUCN. So this is a map of the distribution of the two species. And interestingly enough, they also are known to hybridize. There was a paper came out last week, the first one, Kuhner et al., and it mapped where the hybrids are. And the hybrids are all around the edge of the forest block. And the hypothesis is that because elephants are heavily poached and have been for a long time, they've been kind of washing backwards and forwards across the ecotone. The forest elephants meeting savanna elephants, there not being very many other elephants around with whom to breed, and therefore hybridizing. So you can see that the forest elephants are in the forests. They're big, they're grey, they're not always this easy to see. Here's a picture of one really close to the photographer, and you can barely see it. So it's a little bit nervous making when you're walking around the forests and you hear a sort of a flappy noise, which is the elephant's ear against its back. And then you go, whoa, better move back a bit. So here are the forests that I was mentioning. The main color is terra firma forest. The light green color here is marsh forest, and that's an enormous peatland right in the middle of the Congo Basin. And then you see little bits of mangrove forest along the edges here, and there's a bit of montane forest here and along the Albertine Rift. Sorry, I'm not controlling this very well. It kind of looks like this from the air. So this is an aerial shot of the marsh forests on the left. You see it's quite homogeneous. It's all the same height. It's a little bit lower. And then the terra firma forests, which are much more heterogeneous in height and in species. And for those of us who are Djibouti fans, you can see there's a whole line of rather darker trees running along the edge of the swampland, and that's Djibouti de Wevry, who David Harris has published quite a lot on. So getting back to elephants, they kind of make the forest work. They're one of the many animals that make the forest work, but they're particularly important. Other animals, obviously, are all the ungulates, the great apes, various monkeys, also the larger birds that carry the seeds, like hornbills, and some of the larger pigeons. But elephants are particularly vulnerable, and so are the great apes, because they have slow reproductive rates, and they don't breed very rapidly. And once their populations get knocked down, they find it really difficult to bring their populations back up again to an ecologically functional density. And I think it was Steve Blake and Campos Arces, they called them megagardeners. So if you lose them, the forest starts to change and becomes a different kind of forest. And we'll have a look at that in a minute. So they have elephant size effects. Because of their size, they actually can physically change the forest. They can change the understory. They can change clearings within the forest, which are called buys. I'll show you a picture in a minute. They have an enormous home range compared to everything else. They go much further every day than all the other animals, except perhaps hornbills. They are so big that they can swallow really large seeds. So there's a subset of trees that only elephants can disperse. They eat an awful lot of food, and that also helps them to transport soil nutrients away from the source of those nutrients, like mountains and rivers. And there are conversations going on about they might be important for carbon sequestration as well. So just having a look at the world's tropical forests, this is a 2010 map. Kind of looks all right, doesn't it? Lots of forest in Latin America and Central Africa. But when you look at something called intact forest landscapes, you can see there's not that much left. An intact forest landscape is an idea that was proposed in 2017 by, the Matt Hansen lab. The lead author was Potapov. And the definition is a bit of forest that's at least 500 square kilometers without human activity that can be detected on a satellite. Okay. More recently, there's another definition of intactness, and that's called forest landscape integrity index. And that allows the patches of intact forest to be smaller, but they have to be ecologically functioning. So that's, it's a different definition, but it's kind of the same idea. And you can see that the darker colors, again, cover a lot less surface area than the that map, okay, the 2010 forest cover. It kind of looks like this from the air in Central Africa. There's been a lot less deforestation here than there has been in Amazonia. But there are still bits and pieces that are becoming less intact. These are these brown areas, okay? And this is a map from 2020. They update it every 5 or 6 years. So maybe they'll update it this year or next year. And then this is the Forest Landscape Integrity Index. And you can see that most of Gabon, most of the north of the Republic of Congo, quite a lot of central DRC, and the areas north of the Congo River are still considered to be of high integrity. And if you look at the Afrotropics as a whole, about a third of them still have high integrity. In other words, they're still functioning forests. The way that forests are logged in the two continents are quite different. In Amazonia, you tend to get areas of, this is the protected area. And then you get very intense logging all the way around. You see all this yellow and green stripes. This is all logging activity. And you can see it's like a herringbone or a parallel rectangle effect, and it's really quite intense. That's it zoomed in, right? So you get the trails that the loggers put in to extract the trees, and then people come in and they farm. They do small scale subsistence farming, and so you end up with an awful lot of forest loss per unit. In Central Africa, it's quite different. This is an area in DRC. The lines that you can see there are roads with farmland on either side, but you can see that the blocks of forest are bigger than in Amazonia, and that's better for large animals that A, are typically hunted, and B, need large areas of forest within which to operate. If you look at the patterns of logging in Central Africa, this is from DRC, you can see that although settlements do happen, they're smaller scale. There's a small settlement there, but most of the forest roads, nothing much happens there. This was in 2000, and this was in the year 2000. This is what happened in 2016. This is what it looks like on Landsat. And you can see most of the roads, they just close over in Central Africa. And what happens to them is they look like this long line here is called Musanga cecropia. It's a secondary forest tree. That's about 25 years old. The young shoots of this particular tree and the seedlings are really appreciated by elephants. So where there's elephants in the habitat, you don't get these trees. You just get the road that doesn't have this particular species of tree forming the ribbons through it. But then eventually you get those other secondary forest trees covering it over. And here's an example of what the road network can look like on the left. That was in 1986, and it's an area in the Northern Republic of Congo. And on the right, all those little brown lines, they're logging roads, okay, in 2017. But when you look at the satellite image of it, same place, you can't actually see them. And you can zoom in, and then you can start to see them. There's one there, you know, and you can still drive down this road, and it goes all the way to here. But it's nothing like what you see in Latin America, because you don't get so many settlements. The settlement is here, and the fields are here, and so on. And here, you see these funny things here? There's lots of them. They're not just clouds. These are clearings that are very often rich in mineral salts, and they're hugely appreciated by large mammals, including elephants. And they will keep these, this is kind of a little lake, but they'll keep the boundary open by constantly moving and grazing and visiting these things to extract salt. This is a much bigger one. So this one's about 250 meters end to end. This one's about 0.5 kilometer end to end. This one's in Central African Republic. You can see it's much drier. And if you zoom in, you can see all these paths, right? They're all elephant paths. You zoom in, you can actually see the elephants on Google Earth, which is rather cool. And what it looks like on the ground is this. So that's the exact same place, and they're all busily digging holes in the soil to extract mineral salts. And you can see there's other animals there. Those are called bongos, those stripy animals, which are also using these clearings. This is another one in Congo. Looks like that from the air. This is from right now. I just took this off Google Earth right now. This is from an overflight in the year 2000. Almost no difference at all. And you can see all of these lines in the marshland. It's all elephant trails and gorilla trails. And there's actually a platform here where researchers sit and they observe the animals coming in, and elephants will come in to this big pond in the middle and they'll extract salt. There's one doing it there. So they actually kneel down, and there's a salty substrate, and they'll go right down into the water under the soil and take out salt. So these are really important areas, and they're maintained by the elephants themselves. If you go to areas that have been heavily poached, you can see that the bushes and trees on either side are starting to invade these clearings. But with elephants present and no poaching, the elephants maintain them open. And this is really important for lots of other animals. So I mentioned the bongo. Here's a bunch of red river hogs, which are a kind of wild pig that live in Central Africa. You also get forest buffalo there. You also get sitatunga there. You'll occasionally get black and white colobus monkeys coming down. So the bais, these things are called bais, these clearings. They're important for lots of species of animal, but it's the elephants that are the engineers keeping them open. Okay, so so that's the sort of, the physical changing of the environment. The second thing they do is they're absolutely fantastic seed dispersers, because they can ingest so much, because they go such a long way, because they've got these big home ranges. They can carry forest tree seeds for really long distances. And they can also carry trees with really big fruit like this, which very few other animals can eat, just because of the size of them. Very often the fruits are either very hard or the seeds within them are very hard and big, and none of the other smaller animals can get them down into their throats. And then you get, this is an Ervingia germinating. And this is a little group of trees that started as a dung pile and has been followed for, I think, 2.5 years. You know, they get quite big quite quickly. I'm sure there's various people in this room who can tell us what the species are in this little group, but there's at least 4 species of tree in there. This is a video just to show an elephant eating an elephant fruit, which is about this big. There we go. Yeah, it's about the size of a small football. It's called a Omphalocalpum. It's a cauliflorous fruit. And it tries it. It's got a pretty hard carapace. Can't get into it. So what are we going to do about that then? You see? It might be that the fruit has evolved to have that depression just slowly with elephants, and then it can get into it. Okay, if you don't have elephants in a forest, and this is an experiment that was done in central DRC near Salonga National Park, they looked at a whole bunch of tree species, some of which were known to be only dispersed by elephants, and another bunch of trees that were dispersed by other animals, you know, including elephants, but other animals could eat them as well. And they looked at the age classes of the saplings and the seedlings and the main trunks in the forest, and that they found that most of the elephant obligate tree species were missing the first cohort of their populations. So the really tiny ones that would have germinated in the last 20 years, they were missing, and elephants had been hunted out 30 or 40 years before that. The other cohorts were there, you know. So that's the missing cohort. All the other ones were still there. All the other ones will eventually turn into adult trees. They will eventually reproduce, but once the first cohort here has become an adult tree, maybe 200, 300, 400 years in the future, there's no more trees to replace them. So, you know, that's a reproductively dead population of trees unless elephants can come back. All the other trees looked like that. The first cohort was there, they were fine, as long as their seed dispersers remained in the forest. So if you lose the elephants, you're going to lose a whole bunch of elephant obligate trees, and the forest will slowly change into something else. The other thing is that if the elephants are not there, even the fruits that are not elephant obligate will not be carried so far by elephants, because they can go 6-7 kilometers a day. They quite often spend their time at night in the riverbeds. They go out into the forest about 6-7 kilometers every day, feed, drop droppings with seeds, and then come back again. They've got the largest home range of any of the African animals in the forests. So, you know, you've got all these other, this is log of body mass and their home ranges, and you can see elephants are way up at the top. Yeah. They also will travel much further in the rainy season than they do in the dry season. And again, that gives the plants a chance for their seeds to be deposited in wet soil as opposed to just on dry ground. And this is a paper that I think the authors are all in the room. In areas where you have a forest savanna mosaic, there's a higher fruit availability all along the edge of the forest, and the elephants take advantage of that, especially in the dry season. So that's kind of cool. So then there's a sort of an argument about carbon. The biggest trees have the biggest fruits with the biggest seeds, and they tend to be dispersed by elephants. Okay, and the biggest trees have high wood density compared to the other trees in the forest, the other species. Do appreciate the elephant having a little dung pile here. The seeds are deposited along the elephant paths because the elephants create their own paths in the forest. And what the paths are, they're kind of a network of elephant trees because the elephants for hundreds and hundreds or thousands of years have been walking along the paths, producing their dung, producing elephant food. And so you've got a net, you know, got like a fishnet of elephant paths, of elephant trees, with more kind of random agglomerations of other kinds of trees in the bits in between. And these paths can go, you know, tens of kilometers. This was a study where somebody followed elephant paths with a GPS and mapped them. Look at the scale, yeah, 40 kilometers along the top. So these are, you know, this is about 100 kilometers wide, and there's two red paths that are linking important, they're actually linking important mineral-rich clearings with other mineral-rich clearings. And we know that all along those paths, it's elephant trees. It's really dense wood. It's, you know, high carbon trees. You can see the tree, you can see all these trails using LiDAR. There was a study done just recently in Lope. Here's a map of the elephant paths, mapped with people with GPSs. And here is a LiDAR map of them. And the team found out that you can detect those using either a helicopter or a airplane based LiDAR, and that if you go under the forest, you can see the structure is different. Up in a forest, in the parts of the forest which are not elephant paths, the undergrowth is really quite thick. Along the elephant paths, up to about here, it's quite clear, because of course the elephants are busily walking along and clearing it. And these big trees, a single tree in a year puts on more carbon than the same volume of smaller trees. They just, you know, they seem to be better for carbon sequestration than little trees. So what forest elephants do is they wander about, they squash things just by walking along. They will squash the softer wooded trees selectively, just because they're heavy animals. They also eat the smaller, softer trees. So the result is that the saplings that survive these activities tend to be harder, and they are the trees that will eventually grow up into the harder, larger, denser wooded species that produce elephant fruit. So it's a kind of a circular ecology, ending up in forests with quite a light understory, fewer tree stems than in, for example, Amazonia, where there are no longer elephants. And in Gabon, there was a study that compared the number of large trees with forests in Amazonia, and there were 3 times more large trees in the Gabonese study than there were in an equivalent forest in Peru, which has no longer got any megaherbivores. So another thing that elephants do, they'll transport nutrients sideways away from the mountains and the rivers where they are produced and carried. So this was discovered by looking at the difference in soil fertility patterns in Amazonia and in Central Africa. The Americas used to have these big animals. They used to have things called gomphotheres. They used to have actual elephants. There was the Colombian elephant, for example. And when humans arrived about, I think they argue, this is now being discussed, but it's between 15,000 and maybe 20,000 years ago. It keeps changing. But anyway, humans got rid of most of these large animals within about 1,500 years of them arriving. So the Amazonian forests are missing all of these mega herbivores. And the result seems to have been a change in soil fertility across the Amazon basin. So if you look at Amazonia up here, and the red is the trace of the Amazon River, okay? And it's also the edge of the Andes, here and here. And what happens is phosphorus is worn off the mountains by erosion, carried down into the Amazon and taken out to sea, okay? what these large animals used to do is they would be moving backwards and forwards. Okay, the large animals would have been moving from the river out, away from the river itself, into the floodplain, and carrying phosphorus with it. Okay? With the disappearance of these large animals, this service that they did for the soils of the basin stopped. And this team of researchers, led by Christopher Doughty, who's very prolific, he produced a lot of interesting papers like this. They predicted that within another 30,000 years, the distribution is going to look like this, with almost no phosphorus except immediately along the river, still washing down from the Amazon, from the Andes, but here the fertility of the soil would be much more limited to the immediate bed of the Amazon and its immediate edges, and would no longer be either side of it. And they produced another paper which showed this would be the nutrient distribution capacity before humans arrived in the Americas. Okay, so it's pretty much uniform all over the world. And then now. So the idea is that the red color on the right-hand graphic here means that the capacity of nutrient transport laterally is 100% still there, because Africa still has a lot of elephants, and it also has buffalo, and it also has other large mammals that go long distances transporting these nutrients. Latin America no longer does. I'm not quite sure what's going on in Australia. It might be, maybe it's cattle nowadays. But you can see most of the whole Americas, in fact, have lost this capacity, and an awful lot of Europe. You know, there were mammoths doing that for us, but we got rid of them too. Yeah. So once again, the same group of researchers thought, well, has this had a historical effect on agriculture for people? And they looked at some ancient civilizations, and when the large animals in those areas were killed off, they were all elephants, and what happened to soil fertility. And what tended to happen was that about 2,000 years since people killed off the elephants, soil phosphorus went down. So this may be something that was partially responsible, at least, for the collapse of a few ancient civilizations. I think this is, okay, so we've got the Indus Valley, we've got Mesopotamia, we've got Egypt, China. I think the last large populations of elephants in China disappeared 3,000 years ago. I mean, this is, this has been going on for a very long time. So the last thing is the effects of climate change. Some people in this room have found out that over the years, as climate changes, the numbers of fruit produced per surface area goes down. Some other papers have now started to suggest that the nutrient concentrations in plants all over the world are becoming diluted, and that changes in plant communities from kind of herbaceous to more woody are leading to fewer nutrients being available to herbivores. The nutrient dilution thing is, and I'm sure a lot of people in this room know an awful lot more about it than I do, but if you have a lot of carbon dioxide in the air, there's a whole bunch of plant species that can then grow more quickly. They put on more biomass, but they don't put on concurrent amounts of other nutrients that are important for animals. So they looked, the equivalent is when grass grows fast during the summer, it gets less and less nutritious because the nutrients within it are diluted. So this seems to happen not only seasonally, but now it seems to be the case that as carbon dioxide in the air goes up, plants grow faster, and they become, bite for bite, if you're looking at it from an elephant's point of view, less nutritious. So you can fill yourself up with plant food, but it's not giving you the same amount of nutrients as it did 40, 50, 100 years ago before the Industrial Revolution. And this may have severe repercussions on elephants and everything else. As the plants become more woody, it's called shrubbification, the same kind of thing happens. The plants that are growing are less digestible to herbivores, and therefore any given area may become less interesting, less valuable to herbivores, and the numbers of herbivores that area can support may go down. And we've got a whole bunch of scientists in the room, and I think that there's very little has been done on this yet. And I think get your students onto this, ask people to look at nutrient dilution, not just in crops. It's been done, this is where it all started. People have looked at nutrients in crops. Look at it in especially rainforests. See if this is going on. Asia, Africa, Latin America, if you can. And then the last thing is a paper that just came out, I think 2 weeks ago. And it was looking at crops in the terrestrial realm. They found out that plants, they looked at wheat and maize in Europe and in North America. These two crop species are carrying an awful lot of microplastics now. Their photosynthesis has gone down by about 12%. This will make the plants less valuable to herbivores. Again, go out and look, please, all you researchers in the room and your students. You have got access through the gardens, I guess, to plants growing here, but I think it would be really interesting to see what's going on in the field, in the forests across the world, to see if this is again the case in trees and not just in rapidly growing herbaceous graminae. Okay, and I think that's all. Yes, nobody knows. Go and look. And the first proof of the pudding of the fruit diminishing was led by Emma Bush, who's somewhere in the room, and I think half the other authors are in the room as well. And they looked at, they'd been following fruiting phenology in a field site in Lope in Gabon for 30 years. They'd seen that as temperatures go up, flowering is less common because a lot of tree species require minimum temperatures to flower in that particular forest, and it's probably the case elsewhere. The quantity of fruits available to elephants went down, and then they went and looked at the body condition of elephants over, I think it was a 15-year period, and they found that indeed elephant body condition went down. So it's not good. So we may be having climate change starving not only elephants but many other animals across the world by a combination of reducing fruiting, reducing nutrient availability in plants, either through nutrient dilution or by this shrubbification, and maybe by the microplastics. I've actually asked people in Latin America, go and have a look at your tapir photographs, see if they're getting thinner and thinner over time. They say that they don't think that has happened, but again, if you have access to long-term phenology data sets across the planet and images or some other evidence of animal body condition over long periods of time, see if you can marry those two sources of evidence together. Because at the moment it's just been done at this one site in Lope, Gabon, but I suspect it's a global phenomenon. And so just very briefly, the other threats to elephants are, of course, ivory. I think, yes, Kath, your photograph is in the middle there. Very unpleasant. People will just take the ivory and sell it. The historical range of elephants has been shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. At the top left, you can see the historical pre-ivory, in the sort of 1700s, 1800s distribution of elephants. Now they're just found, this is elephants, both of the species, they're just found in protected areas, mainly in Central and Eastern Africa. They are in Southern Africa, but they're all in very tiny reserves. They're not running wild across enormous areas anymore. There's a new map just coming out within a couple of months, I think, which it's even worse. Have I got time? Yeah. I'll just briefly mention that we can show the global distribution of forest elephants disappearing over a sort of 10-year period. We did surveys across all of these areas. The scientific community. We put all the data together. That's the distribution of forest elephants in the year 2002, where grey denotes hardly any elephants. And that's what happened in 10 years. Okay, and that data set is already 10 years old. So it's probably even worse now. The light green was the IUCN's classification of possibly some elephants there, and the darker green was definitely elephants there. And then again, you see the difference going up to 2016 this time. So it's a few years later than the last map. So yeah, no, impossible and doubtful. And then there's the map again, and there's an elephant for you to admire.